is not a debate that takes us forward or brings us together. To take us forward, we need to understand in legislation, in each legislation, what is the obligation we owe to each other as citizens to give effect to the intentions of each law. In particular, how democratic governments respond to issues raised by Māori, not the courts or tribunals, but by Māori to their elected representatives. What will deliver the outcomes needed to benefit our communities? That is what New Zealand First has committed to delivering, not entrenching a reinvention of the treaty and what it means to New Zealand, but providing a clear path forward to a better nation. We will deliver a pathway to economic prosperity for iwi, to allow them to be unshackled from a narrative of grievance. Mr. Speaker, I have spent years defending our rights as New Zealanders to be treated respectfully and equally before the law. Whatever journey brought us to this nation, we are owed the same rights, and this House has a duty to ensure that is what our laws provide. We do not need new legislation in this space. We need to clarify, simplify and verify our existing laws. To do this, we need to recognise and respect an honest account of our history. Importantly, an honest account of our history will make sure we are not oppressed by the racism of low expectations. When we can look to our tupuna for what they achieved, we can silence the narrative that we are a nation of two peoples. When we look to our tupuna, we can understand what personal responsibility means, what honour and dignity means, what sacrifice and hard work means. We can be aspirational, not divisive. This is the legacy that is to be honoured. I have spoken at the first reading of this bill about New Zealand First leader and Deputy Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Winston Peters' reverence in speaking about our great Māori leaders who forged the path for a better New Zealand. Sir Raparana Ngata, Sir Peter Buck, Sir Maui Pomari, Sir James Carroll, all shared the position that there were no principles to the treaty, and this remains New Zealand First position. It is under the shared knowledge and understanding of our history that New Zealand First has remained committed to the purpose of the treaty. As Dame Whena Cooper said, we signed the treaty to become one people. We cannot allow the treaty to be weaponised, and we cannot allow it to take a place that will forever position us as New Zealanders in conflict with each other. As a result, that is the very antithesis of what was intended by the bill. This Parliament must hold fast to our democracy and retain supremacy over the direction we take as a country. New Zealand First knows this means clarifying our existing legislation. New legislation that entrenches a definition of the principles is not the solution for our country. It is not an end position. It would be a launching platform for those who gain political relevance by driving a narrative of victimhood in the absence of doing the hard work to improve outcomes. New Zealand First is the party of practical action. We know what New Zealanders are calling for, and it is not more noise, but a pathway to first world wages, top-class education, a warm, dry home and access to healthcare when they need it. We talk much in the House about what divides us, our quantum of Māori, whether we have a vanilla lens or who is qualified to speak for who. That is what oppresses us, qualified to speak for who. That is what oppresses us. That is what deprives our future generations of achieving their potential. Mr. Speaker, it is time to put this bill to rest. We have work to be done and serious decisions to be made. New Zealand First is up for the challenges that are ahead. We know we need to work effectively together and how important it is that Parliament is respected. Mr. Speaker, if New Zealand First believed this bill had merit, we would have supported it. We do not. Mr. Speaker, New Zealand First does not commend this bill to the House.
Hannah Rafiki might be Clark. Split talk.
E rangi e, whakataka te hau ki tau piri. Tangihia ngā mate, no ngā haue whao te motu, kua hinga ngā tōtara o te waunui a tāne. Some of our greatest trees fell on this journey. From the west, te pā whakawairua o te Pāti Māori Tariana Turia. To the east, te Māraikura o te Kohanga Reo, tana tā whiwhirangi. Ki te morehu whakamutunga o te rua tekau mā waru, Sir Bob Gillies. And recently, the fearless fighter from the far north, Hinewhare Harawira. Hoki mai ki te ika nui, te whareari ki Kingi Tu Heitia, who left a message of unity to the four winds. Kei taku ariki nui, koe ni ngā waihono i te pō. E noho nei I runga I te torona, rire hau, pai mai rire. This speech has been the most daunting speech I've ever had to write, and I've said, oh no, what am I going to say now? How are we supposed to voice the 270,000 written submissions, the 13,600 oral submissions, the 300,000 signatures in the petition, the biggest hikoi with 100,000 footsteps marching to Parliament? How do we piece this all together in a 5-minute speech? Here's how. We're not going to talk about the Treaty Principles Bill today. This bill was an undebatable and a non-negotiable debate. And the whole world knows our view on it. The real issue is not this bill, nor is it doing a haka or practicing our Indigenous customs in Parliament. The real problem is that this institution, this House, has only ever recognised one partner, one culture, one language from one treaty. When will the rules of this House acknowledge the laws of this land, tikanga, and te Treaty of Waitangi? That is the real question of privilege here. At our darkest hour, we could have chosen to fight this, but we chose to survive this. This bill hasn't been stopped. This bill has been absolutely annihilated. Mr. Speaker, Aotearoa New Zealand made it clear to our country that it does not support this bill. We are not divided, but united, with the 90% of our country submissions saying no. Why would we even entertain the 8% divisive rhetoric that this bill tries to achieve and waste $6 million worth of taxpayers' money when that could have been given and spent to proper food for our tamariki? Mr. Speaker, it was the voices from Times Square, New York to Kaikohe, the streets of Oxford to Ngaruahia, the Waitangi tribunals, the art on Kakahu, the anonymous person who sponsored thousands of te tiriti books, the hundreds of submissions from Whatawhata to Whangarei, the call of unity with huia motu across the country. We could write hundreds of books on the oral submissions and their gems spoken from people like Tāti Moti Karitu, Dr. Carlo Mila, Maia Te Hira and more. The rangatahi from Te Aupōuri, who carried the banner all the way from Te Rerenga Wairua to the forecourt. This ignited an emotion that echoed with all walks of life, all races, all ages, and all genders across the world. Just remember, it was their voices, their powerful voices that engaged to drown out this bill. So where to next? These past 2 years have been completely about survival. This next chapter needs to be about steps to thriving. And our roadmap to our next destination has never been so clear. For us to thrive, our job over the next few months will be to create bills, policies and legislation to remove significant barriers that disallow Māori from accessing their basic rights, not privileges. Aotearoa Hou isn't a fantasy, it's a place where unity and the roadmap has no roadworks on it, and it stops us and doesn't stop us from accessing our basic rights, like proper healthcare without a 2-week wait. It's not having to decide between learning our language or student debt. It's being able to come home to build without having to wait 3 years for the Māori Land Court. It's Māori owning the first ever supermarket to breaking down the supermarket duopoly. It's being able to swim in your tupuna awa, not chemical quarries. It's 14 Māori seats in Parliament. It's not a 5-year waiting list to enrol your tamariki in kohanga. It's a place of 4,507 Māori tamariki coming out of state care. It's maunga kahuranaki back for its uri. This is tino rangatiratanga, control over our daily decisions we make. Brick by brick, we will move from surviving to thriving. Kamate, kamate, kaora, kaora. Kamate te pire, kaora te iwi Māori. We had 2 choices, to live or to die. We chose to live. Kaora tonu tātou, ake, ake, ake.
Tamatha Paul.
Mr. Speaker, te iwi Māori, tangata tiriti, that'll teach him. Mr. Speaker, this Treaty Principles Bill has been an emotional roller coaster. I know that for many of the people who made their voices heard, they didn't have the time or the money or the energy to give, and yet they showed up in droves. The whole process was so difficult because at every juncture in this journey, we gave them an opportunity to change their minds. We battled in select committee at every single meeting and said, okay, New Zealand First and National Party, let's get rid of the bill then if you don't support it so much. And those opportunities were turned down. It was a privilege to absorb all of the knowledge and the wisdom from all of the people that came to talk to us, from Ani Mikaere to Vincent O'Malley to Honourable Crispin Layson. I felt so much shame and so much sadness in many of those submissions as we had iwi come and talk to us, some so angry they were shaking. They couldn't even articulate the trauma that this whole process has rehashed. And this was an example of Parliament sticking the knife in again and again and again. Mr. Speaker, I was fighting for my life in Select Committee. I remember very tense conversations, even amongst opposition parties, because there is more than one way to skin a cat and there are more than one ways to kill a bill. And we all had different ideas, but we all knew that this needed to go in the bin. So I want to acknowledge Duncan, Tracy, Ginny, Takuta, for all of the mahi that we did, representing the kotahitanga that our people want to see, that they deserve, and behind closed doors, hard, methodical, genuine mahi behind closed doors as well. And as satisfying as it would be to say a massive shame, I will leave it with a whakatauki that one of my tupuna said from Ngāti Awa, te tainga o te rā. Waiho mā te whakamā e patu. Let shame be their punishment. I want to give a special mihi to all of my colleagues who have put in the mahi. We collected 13,000 signatures. We collected 640 postcards. We went into schools. We went into touch tournaments. We went to community hui. We also went into the club and collected submissions. I also want to acknowledge my friend and colleague, Steve Abel, for being my tag team partner in all of the submissions. Steve represents a generation of people who were not lucky enough to be taught about te tiriti in schools, but whose earnest dedication to learning and to fighting besides iwi to stop the ransacking of our coastlines, our forests and our whenua is what made him realise that our interests, tangata tiriti and te iwi Māori, are not different, they are the same. And so to every tangata tiriti who made their voices heard and said that that little man does not represent your views, kia ora to you. I would like to acknowledge Eru Kapakingi, Rihanna Tingahue and Luke Fitzmaurice-Brown for bringing the kōrero to TikTok, bringing it to the new generations to understand what the conversation meant and that their voices were important. And I want to thank the Zanes, the Bloody Samoans, the Cassies, the Rafutiroas, the Shamias for bringing this conversation to the people, making it accessible. And te iwi, the fight is not over despite their crocodile tears. We still have a government that is willing to use our mana as a cheap bargaining tool. Despite what the New Zealand First member has just told us, they are the ones that want to remove 28 general treaty clauses across legislation. That is disgraceful. They are the ones that want to introduce the fast track bill that will ride roughshod over important treaty rights for our whenua. Attacks on Indigenous people everywhere are happening right now. This was not unique to Aotearoa. This was part of a coordinated plan to undermine Indigenous people everywhere. But I say to my First Nations brothers and sisters in Australia, as I do to the Palestinians who are having bombs dropped over their heads in Gaza right now, that we stand together. They will not win. Mr. Speaker, they may have deep pockets, but we have the people power and we will not be quiet. And this is a valuable lesson to leave our tiriti alone.
The Honourable James Meager.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the now former chair of the Hardworking Justice Committee, I wanted to focus my contribution today on the process that the committee went through in considering this bill. And as I do so, I would like to acknowledge the work of the clerks.
Hold it here. Some of the conversations going on now needs to stop.
I'd like to acknowledge the work of the clerks and the Select Committee Services team on this bill. It was an interesting test case juggling 3 different clerks throughout this process and the number of staff that we had helping us. But at all points, they were upfront, they were clear in their work, and they provided consistent advice, sometimes in the face of quite significant and severe personal reflections from members of the committee. So I wanted to acknowledge the work of the clerks and the team on this bill. Can I also, in doing so, acknowledge the work of the committee and MPs on the committee who generally worked collegially and collectively in this work. And it's helpful, I think, to point to Appendix B in the Select Committee report for the record of decisions made by the committee. And I think the public should look at that appendix and it should analyse it for the consistency and the amount of unanimity that actually existed in the committee. Most of the decisions in the committee, if not all of them, bar a few, were made unanimously on things like the length of submissions, the number of hours of submissions we would hear, how to treat form and template submissions, how we would set criteria for what submissions would be heard. They were all decisions that were agreed to unanimously by the committee, and it showed the collegiality and what can happen when members of the committee work together well. Mr. Speaker, I did want to provide the public some reassurances after the past few weeks and some of the information that's been going around there. I want to reassure the public that every submission that has been made to the committee has been read by someone. It has been read by an official in the ministry, and the themes from those submissions integrated into the departmental report. And I would encourage anyone out there who is interested in this process to read the departmental report. It is rich in information, it is rich in content, and it reflects the incredibly hard work done by the ministry officials in reading over 300,000 submissions and synthesising them into that document. Mr. Speaker, every submission that has been made to the committee has been available to all members of Parliament, not just those on the committee at all times. I wanted to clear that up. There has been some misinformation out there that members have not had access to those submissions. Again, if you go through the record, you can see that we agreed to the process of accessing submissions from the clerk's team. All members agreed to that, and it is very disappointing to see suggestions that suggest to the otherwise out there. Mr. Speaker, every submission that has been made to the committee that meets the criteria set by the committee will be published and tabled and released publicly for everybody to see, so they can see for themselves the content of those 300,000 submissions. Mr. Speaker, again, the committee has reported the bill back because there is no further work to do. There were some suggestions that this has been outrageously rushed back into the House, but following the end of 80 hours of submissions, over 529 people making oral submissions, at the end, all of the work program has been completed. Members all agreed unanimously that no changes to the bill needed to be made. They all agreed that the Parliamentary Counsel Office did not need to draft a revision track version. They all agreed that the report back would come soon. They all had 3 chances to consider the draft Select Committee report, and at the end, every single member on that committee voted for it to be reported back to the House. So that needs to be placed on the record for the reassurances of the public. Mr. Speaker, there is a lot to go through when it comes to considering what we went through on this bill. I wanted to touch on a few things, a few lessons maybe learnt by the Parliament if this was to ever happen again. In early January, the Select Committee was called back somewhat early from some people's holidays to deal with the issue of the parliamentary website crashing. Now, I want to provide some reassurances to the public that at no time has there been any suggestions of foreign interference or scurrilous behaviour in that process. It is simply a matter of what we all did throughout our careers and throughout university and school, of leaving it to the last minute and the website not being able to handle the volume that came through on the very last day. That is it. No conspiracies, no interference. That's what happened. Mr. Speaker, I think we learned a lesson there in terms of setting the time for responding to submissions. Generally, submissions are set to be due by 11:59 p.m. at night. That, of course, meant that any issues with the process were unable to be answered by the Select Committee team and by the parliamentary team. So moving forward, I think on bills of significance, we should consider setting those deadlines to be the middle of the day so that people have a chance to deal with any of those issues. Mr. Speaker, questions remain throughout the public about how easy or how hard it was to make a submission. And there were complaints sent through to my email and to our office about the fact that it is a very straightforward process to make a submission. And I think there are questions to the House about whether or not there are restrictions put in place. I actually think it's a good thing that it is as simple as possible for the public to make submissions to the Select Committee. All you need to do is go to the Parliament website, enter your submission, and it is done. Alternatively, write it in hard copy. There are questions around whether or not you need to provide ID, whether or not you can do them on behalf of other people. And I will put a thought out there in terms of if you are wanting to make a submission to the Parliament as an individual, as an organisation, do that on your own steam. Do not rely on third-party organisations or third-party activists or political parties who go out there and want to collect your data and harvest your data and purport to provide your submission on your behalf. If you want to make a submission to this Parliament, use the process that is made available. It is easy, it is straightforward, it makes the clerk's job incredibly straightforward and easy, and it means we do not run into issues of people having their submissions counted or not counted in terms of them being form submissions. And Mr. Speaker, I wanted to touch on the purpose of the Select Committee process, because members today and throughout the process have talked about the numbers and talked about it being a record-breaking achievement. The purpose of the Select Committee process is not a poll. It is not a petition. It is not a referendum. It is not a platform for advocacy. It is a process to allow legislators in this House the opportunity to scrutinise legislation, to offer improvements and to make amendments. That is what it is for. It is not an advocacy platform. It is not a performance piece, and members across the hall can laugh all they want, but if you are a parliamentarian and you are committed to the process of scrutinising legislation put forward by the executive, by the government, you will take that process seriously, how they conduct themselves within Select Committees. Partial disclosure of incomplete information which is designed for political gain and results in confusion and anger in the public is deeply unhelpful for our democratic process. We have had to spend a significant amount of time and resource, including in the clerk's office, to deal with that misinformation being spread by members of Parliament deliberately for political purposes. So let me state once and for all, for the record, the appendix in the Select Committee report outlines every decision made by the Select Committee up until the deliberation phase. And there is only one side which has been consistent in our desire to ensure that people have had their say and their voices are heard throughout the entire process. And Tamitha Paul is correct. They did try and at every opportunity to stop people from having their say. We voted the bill through to Select Committee as per the coalition agreement. We did not oppose the open discussion. We called for public submissions and allowed the public to have their say. The opposition voted for the bill to be reported back on the same day it was introduced to the Select Committee. We were the ones that called for oral submissions to be held. The opposition called for only written submissions and to prevent every single oral submission from being held. That is part of the record. We were the ones that instructed the ministry to prepare a departmental report. The opposition voted for no departmental report to be written, therefore no analysis of submissions and no opportunity for members of the public to have their submissions read and synthesised into the report. We were the ones that invited the minister in charge of the bill to present and make his case to the Select Committee. The opposition opposed that opportunity. And finally, need to make it clear that the committee unanimously wrote to the Business Committee to seek the agreement to make sure that every single submission was counted while the outstanding ones were processed for consistency with the standing orders, and it is the opposition which opposed that process. Mr. Speaker, I have tried my best to set the record straight on some of those issues and to provide some reassurances for the public out there. But I do finish my contribution by extending my gratitude to the hundreds of people who did take the time to present to us in person in Select Committee and who did so with grace, with a sense of measure and with composure, and with a level of respect and manners that I don't think that was always afforded to them by members of our committee. And it is a great shame. And for those individuals who were treated disrespectfully by members of Parliament when they gave their submission, I want to apologise to them. I want to thank all of those who sent kind words to the committee for the hard work undertaken in terms of considering this bill, whether or not they supported it or not. I'm glad that we are bringing this piece of legislation to a conclusion this afternoon. I'm glad that we can look forward to the task of rebuilding our economy and building a brighter, more prosperous future for all New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker, the members opposite may last, but that is what we are focused on here. In saying that, we do not support this bill passing, and I'll conclude my contribution by saying we do not commend this bill to the House.
That is the last outburst that member is to contribute to the House. The Honourable Willie Jackson.
Mr. Speaker, I wanted to acknowledge the Harawira whānau firstly, because this week they lost one of their matriarchs and one of their leaders, Hine Whare Harawira, and I was, my marae hosted the tangi for a day and a night. I mention her because she was one of the biggest fighters against this bill. And I mention her also because the Pāti Māori turned up. They were there a little bit earlier than me, and they gave a copy of the bill to put in the hole with Hine Whare tomorrow. So, mihi ana kia kōrua mō kōrua mahi a tāhua. But we remember her well in her fight for Māori rights. So, we mihi to their whānau today, to Hone Harawira and the whānau, and they'll be burying her tomorrow. I want to also thank today the Justice Committee, particularly our leader over here, Duncan Webb, and Ginny over here did a fabulous job, and also congratulate the chair, although I wasn't too happy with the speech today, but without doubt the next leader of the National Party when the, and probably first Māori Prime Minister when the coup takes place at National over the next few months. Mr. Speaker, the Treaty Principles Bill has highlighted the very worst of our democracy and at the same time the very best of our democracy. This race-baiting political stunt has been a right-wing obscenity masquerading as equality. You should be ashamed on that side of the House, Mr. Speaker. They should all be ashamed for allowing this hate into Parliament. What is most offensive, Mr. Speaker, is the way that the ACT Party and the political right have twisted the narrative to fit in a racist agenda. Mr. Speaker, the treaty, as people have said, is not about racial privilege or racial superiority. It is and always has been about legal rights Māori have in their contract with the Crown. Once and for all, Mr. Speaker, for David Seymour's benefit and his supporters, treaty rights are not special privileges or even extra rights, as he likes to paint them. They are rights that were in place before the Treaty of Waitangi was signed. The treaty simply reaffirms those rights. The rights acknowledge language, culture, identity, and property rights. And it's ironic, isn't it, that the great advocates of property rights, the ACT Party, are so opposed to this. We get it now. Property rights only count if you're Pākehā. But if you're Māori, forget about them. Those Indigenous rights didn't suddenly disappear when Māori signed the treaty or when Mr. Seymour dreamed up his Treaty Principles Bill. To therefore twist treaty rights into some claim of apartheid is not only disingenuous, Mr. Speaker, it is bad faith. And those two words sum up this whole disgraceful episode. And that is bad faith. ACT never wanted a genuine debate on the treaty, Mr. Speaker, because this was never about a real engagement of ideas. This was always, Mr. Speaker, about whipping up racist hysteria and calling that a debate. David Seymour attempts, we heard him today, Mr. Speaker, he compares his end-of-life referendum with this political stunt and tries to claim that they're similar. No, they are not, Mr. Seymour. The end-of-life referendum was a conscience issue, whereas rewriting the treaty and forcing it upon the Indigenous people using the tyranny of the majority is an outright assault on our history and our rights. You cannot compare the end-of-life referendum with an attempt to erase Māori legal rights. On a philosophical level, the end of life is an individual right. Rewriting the treaty is not an individual right. It is a property right that has enormous impacts that go well beyond the individual. Finally, on referendums, Mr. Seymour, they're not always the solution that you make out they are. Sometimes, believe it or not, the majority get it wrong. Your government is an example of that. Let's look at referendums. Let's ask the Aboriginal people of Australia what they think of referendums. When they were sadly defeated in their vote to recognise their Indigenous rights last year. Or maybe the rainbow community. Do we really think that homosexual law reform would have been passed in the 1980s? Give it a break. No chance. Or perhaps when my auntie Te Emera Jackson, the nanny of the young Hannah over here, when she presented the Māori language petition over 50 years ago, talking about rights for Te Reo Māori, talking about Te Reo being an official language. Do you think the public would have supported that? Do you think her and Ngā Tamatoa and all our Māori language advocates would have been successful if this was a subject of a referendum? Not at all. Not a chance, Mr. Speaker, not a chance. And here's the question, here's the real question for all the brilliant lot in ACT. Rather than test the legitimacy of the treaty by a simple referendum, why not respect the decades of treaty jurisprudence that's been developed by both Māori and the Crown, and more particularly, the leading legal minds of this country? But no, I'm always right. Seymour refuses to do this. It's an absolute disgrace, Mr. Speaker, how he refuses to accept the words of our greatest legal minds, politicians, academics, and of course, Māori. Very similar, Mr. Speaker, I might add, of people who believe that the world is still flat and not round. What? And that sums up him and his nutjob supporters. While ACT and their band of appalling supporters are the very worst of our democracy, the way people have responded in rejecting this is our democracy at our best. 90% of the over 300,000 spoke against this lie. Over 100,000 around the country, 100,000 marching to call the stunt out for what it was. The massive cross-section of civil society, our young people, our Pacifica whānau, our Pākehā allies, tangata treaty, the disabled community, the rainbow community, unions, churches and academics, all combined as one to cry out that the treaty is our shared identity.
You just cut out the conversation down there.
The treaty is our hope and is our shared unique feature that defines us. Mr. Speaker, there are vastly more of us who see the treaty as a positive rather than a weapon to divide us. ACT's hate has been defeated here today. Let us not forget all this divisiveness, all this naked racism, all this spite and malice has been whipped up by them and a redneck agenda. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, in our view, that was allowed because the Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, did not stand up against David Seymour. But wait a minute, he didn't even have to stand up. He didn't even have to stand up. As we found out, this wasn't even a bottom line in negotiations. So much for the great negotiator, Christopher Luxon. It defies belief, Mr. Speaker, that we're talking about the treaty principles today, given that we now know the full story behind the coalition negotiations. Shame on the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker. Our nation required leadership on race issues, but the Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, wanted to be the Prime Minister at all costs, blinded to ACT's demands, well, they weren't even demands in the end, and instead of resisting them, he caved into them. And where is the Prime Minister now, Mr. Speaker? That's the question. Let it be known, Mr. Speaker, that history is watching this day, and the people will not forget who turned up and who did it, and who led and who did it. Our leader turned up. What a fabulous kōrero from him today. It was fabulous. His kōrero about coming together and celebrating our differences is resonating with our communities. And his acknowledgement that Māori did not concede tino rangatiratanga or sovereignty is the first time that any leader of a mainstream party has admitted that in Aotearoa. Why? Because he knows 80,000 Māori are not going to give up rangatiratanga all their whole lives to 2,000 settlers. So well done to our leader who shows courage, which is sadly lacking with the government at the moment. Mr. Speaker, I said in the first reading that David Seymour was talking falsehoods, ignorance and nonsense. And I've had time to reflect on my speech, Mr. Speaker, and it may come as a surprise, but my views haven't changed with Mr. Seymour. But I want to again say how proud I was of the Select Committee. I want to honour that committee today, Mr. Speaker. So my final words in terms of my kōrero today, I have to say to David Seymour and say to you straight, he's left the building. He's over there. Well, I'll say to you wherever you are. Oh, there you are, David Seymour. You're a disgrace to this House, and when it comes to the Treaty of Waitangi, you will and always be a liar. Kia ora, Mr. Speaker.
Member will withdraw and apologise for that statement. Mr. Jackson, you need to withdraw and apologise for making that statement.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if I was to withdraw and apologise, it would be an insult to 270,000 Select Committee submitters who all think that Mr. Seymour is a liar also.
That is your opinion. Leave the House. Leave the House. Leave the House. Yep. Just dealing with something at the moment. Point of order, Rawari Waititi.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. I don't think he was talking about his character. Actually, David Seymour was lying on the ground over there.
Rema Nakari. And we'll go back into listening to speeches in silence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ahi Marie to everyone who has tuned in, and haere mai to all gathered in our parliamentary whare, particularly my quasi-niece, Ripura, who has travelled all the way from South Auckland to witness this kaupapa. Welcome, Habibti. Mr. Speaker, I rise to convey my whakaaro on the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill in its second reading. I believe I've exercised my duty on the Justice Select Committee as a member as best I could. And I want to thank the former chair, the Honourable James Meagher, who sits beside me, and my colleagues across the committee for the work and for the passion that they put into this kaupapa. It was often very testing and quite emotionally taxing, Mr. Speaker, but I felt privileged throughout the process to see firsthand New Zealand dialogue and history unfolding. I often share my National Party views, values, Mr. Speaker, where appropriate. And here, if I may, I would like to share one of our values that's been around for a long time: equal citizenship and equal opportunity for all New Zealanders. And so the challenges of the treaty, Mr. Speaker, are complex. They're complex, and as I've said, they're challenging. And for over 185 years, we have grappled with these challenges together. And together, we will continue to do so. This model has served New Zealand relatively well, and I truly believe that we are more open-minded and a tolerant country because of our treaty discussions. As we've heard earlier and throughout this whole conversation, the National Party strongly asserts that a referendum on the treaty would be a simplistic approach to a very extremely complex and challenging issue. And so today, we are voting to ensure it will go no further. And I say this respectfully to our coalition partners, but this is our strong view. Mr. Speaker, as I look around the gallery, I see it filled with beautiful faces, many of which I am in the blessed position to know. Friends sitting above from both sides of today's korero. Friends whom I have sat down with in my home as we've shared Lebanese kai that I've cooked and discussed these challenging and complex issues that our country faces. We've disagreed and we've agreed and we've disagreed again, but all from a place of honesty because we are in this together. And that is what I hope that we can take from today, Mr. Speaker. I hope that we will continue approaching our relations in a measured, case-by-case basis, because that's what our profound history deserves. Let's underpin our conversations not with a desire for political points, but rather with honest intentions for our collective future. Mā tātou going forward, active, courageous and valiant, I do not commend this bill to the House.
I call on Krishna Tangariri Manu.
Tēnā koe te maanga o te whare. O te rā kutaku mihi tuatahi ki te wāhi ngaro, rātou kua wehe atu. Kāre au e tū I roto I toku kotahi. Nā reira kei te mihi atu au kia koutou kua tai a kanohi mai ki te whakatinana I ngā wawata o te tini me te mano. Kia takataka hi tēnei pere, kore takera wātu, ki raro. Mr. Speaker, hearing speeches of vindication from that side of the House are very hard to swallow because it has been this national-led government that has allowed this ugly monster to rear its head in the light of day. The individual whose name this bill is in and his party have suggested the treaty gives Māori different rights and privileges. And by God, do I stand here privileged. I am the privileged product of people, generations, who persevered in the face of breaches of the Treaty of Waitangi. I am privileged to live on my whenua. I am privileged to speak taku reo Māori, te reo o ku tupuna. Rights and privileges denied to too many Māori. Rights and privileges that through the perseverance we have managed to maintain that this bill sought to undermine and failed. Aotearoa, and indeed, iwi take from around the world stood united against this backward-looking, divisive bill. And let's not forget resource wasting. He mau mone. 300,000 of you presented your opposition to this bill. And behind you was a nation united. The Aotearoa New Zealand we believe in, organised and marched. Some of you Aotearoa simply changed your worldview, adding momentum to this kaupapa. Mana Māori was never threatened by this bill. Kāre taia te kāwanatanga te karo I tō mātou mana tuku iho. And throughout this ordeal, people across Ikaroa, Rāwhiti, and indeed Aotearoa have held fast to your vision for our future. And you're ready to get back to business. Back to the business of ensuring an Aotearoa where our tamariki mokopuna thrive in our ao Māori me te ao whānui. And Aotearoa where our whenua is nurtured and developed. Whānau have a roof over their heads, our hauora is a priority, and in Aotearoa where you can earn a good living. Back to the business of expanding the thriving Māori economy, and we're all about it. To get back to that business e huama, you need a government that enables your moi moia, and that ain't it. I said in the first reading of this kore take bill, we do not need to change the treaty. We need to change this government. Toi tu te treaty, part 1, tick. Let's get on with part 2. They asked for the election to be a referendum. Let's deliver. Me rehi ta tea, me pōti tea, kia panaia tēnei kāwanatanga ngā pāti katoa o tēnei kāwanatanga ki waho o tēnei whare. Mr. Speaker, I stand once more with pride and privilege to condemn this bill, and I repeat, this government must not be vindicated. It is this government that allowed this bill to cause the divisive conversations throughout Aotearoa. E te māngai o te whare, kei te tū anō awau, me taku pāti, me tēnei taha o te whare, ki te whakahē, rawātu, I tēnei pere, takahi mana, hoki whakamuru, hoi anō rā Aotearoa whānui, tēnā rawātu tātou katoa.
The Honourable Scott Simpson.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I had an opportunity to participate in the first reading of this bill, and that debate was a momentous debate in terms of how this House views this legislation that's proposed before us. And at that time, Mr. Speaker, I made it clear that, in my view, over successive decades, New Zealand has grappled with how to deal with the treaty. It's been a long, continuous and ongoing debate. And that will be the case after this bill has been put to rest. That debate will continue, that discussion will continue. Indeed, it'll continue long after all of us have left this place. And so while, Mr. Speaker, we don't necessarily always agree, successive national governments have always worked well with Māori on treaty issues. And we've always ensured that there are equal citizenship rights and equal opportunity for all New Zealanders. And so the challenges that we confront as a nation around the treaty are complex. And it's just not realistic, Mr. Speaker, to suggest that nearly 200 years of debate, discussion, protest sometimes, informed debate, education and input from so many New Zealanders over all those years should be settled just with the stroke of one legislative pen. It's too blunt, it's too simplistic, and it risks in reality actually stoking grievance and driving division. I don't think that's good for our nation. I don't think that that helps us achieve the goals and aspirations that we all seek to achieve by coming to this place. And national takes always the more difficult and realistic practical approach when it comes to working together. And we do so working through issues in relation to the treaty on a case-by-case basis. For instance, the reversal of a number of divisive co-governance policies from the previous government that would have in fact contributed to worse economic and social regulatory outcomes. For instance, Three Waters and the Māori Health Authority. And we've also instructed government agencies in the term of this government to deliver public services based on needs and working with iwi and other providers where specific needs exist amongst Māori and other communities. And we are continuing, Mr. Speaker, to establish and progress treaty settlements to address the historical wrongdoings. And in another example, Mr. Speaker, restoring the rights of communities to determine whether to introduce Māori wards after the previous government denied local constituents the opportunity to do so. That's another example of a case-by-case approach to how we address those issues. So, Mr. Speaker, having participated in the first reading debate, having watched closely the work of the Select Committee chaired by my friend and colleague, the Honourable James Meagher, ultimately I want to reiterate in the closing moments of my contribution in this debate that this national party that I am proud to be a member of, our focus and the focus of this coalition government remains firmly and steadfastly on improving outcomes for Māori and non-Māori. And we do that, Mr. Speaker, by rebuilding our economy, by restoring law and order, and by delivering better public services for all New Zealand. And Mr. Speaker, this bill achieves none of that.
Call the Honourable Dr. Duncan Webb.
Te rākau, te mana whakawā. Well, here we are, finally getting rid of this divisive and wasteful bill. Now, unlike James Meagher, I'm not going to spend 10 minutes whining about process, but I will say two things. Firstly, there are 105,000 submissions that aren't on the parliamentary record today. And to suggest that that's all okay is false. And there was a room down in the corner with 24 boxes of handwritten, typed submissions, hard copy submissions that you had to go in and rifle through if you wanted to find something. And if you wanted to find a particular submission, you had to name it. You had to name the submitter. And I'm sorry, but I don't know 307,000 people.
Really?
And what's more, whilst that process was still ongoing, the chairman of the Select Committee moved the motion to report the bill back to the House 40 days before it was due, whilst we were still working through the submissions and putting them on the record. That is shabby process, but not as shabby as what the government has done and the Prime Minister has done in letting this bill come to the House. Because this is a bill that the Prime Minister had the gall to stand up and say it's not going to pass, and to then bring it to this House is disrespectful to this chamber. Because this chamber's time is valuable, and there should be put before this House laws which are seriously being considered, not flying up the flagpole some divisive bill. But I do want to pay tribute to those submitters, all of those people. And I must say it was humbling, not only the people who came in person from across the community, but also to read some of those written submissions as well. And I want to pay respect and to the diversity of the views, the people who came and gave their whakapapa and told their stories and expressed their vehement opposition to the bill, not in a way that David Seymour would understand, but in a way that came from a long history. Not a academic tradition that I'm familiar with, but I engaged with it and I learned from it. And the new immigrants who came and said, I'm proud to be here and to participate in this country, and I understand. The treaty helps me understand my place in this community. You know, and I've seen, David Seymour was already on Twitter saying that he doesn't have a good reason for why this bill is being turned around. Well, I'll give you one. I'll give you one. It's a lie. The bill is a lie because it says one thing and the truth is another. It says that these are the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, and they're not. And as Chris Finlayson said, you can't legislate to make the world flat. The fact is you cannot legislate the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi out of existence. They might be constitutional truisms, or they might be undermining the customary position of iwi in our country, but they're not the treaty principles. You can't make up the underlying fabric of the treaty. So it's absolutely fatuous to suggest that this bill reflected in any way the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. And I want to address head on two other fallacies which underpin this bill. The first is that his stooges would front up to the committee and say, this is about living in a liberal democracy. And their concept of a liberal democracy was shallow and impoverished, because all it meant was one person, one vote. What it didn't mean was a respect for human rights, a recognition of Indigenous people in the place where they belong. What it didn't recognise was the rights of minorities. So what we had was an argument which was about 100 years out of date, and that's about where they are. And you know, and the irony is this, that in all of the advice that was received, not just submissions, but the thoughtful advice pointed this out. And even the Cabinet Manual, a document which isn't a political document, makes it really clear that there is a balance to be struck between the rights of the majority power in a place like this, and minority rights. The protection of fundamental social and constitutional values. But the ACT Party's not interested in that. They're interested in a radical individualism which doesn't recognise that there are communities of interest, that there are differences between people, and that in a modern liberal democracy, as Bronwyn Hayward so thoughtfully put, there is a duty to protect those people who are vulnerable, to respect Indigenous rights, and to ensure that the majority does not oppress the minority. So that's what a modern functioning liberal democracy is. They don't want that, Kieran McAnulty. They want the opposite. They want to go back 100 years and live in a radical libertarian world. The other argument they want, and I want to go head on, and the ACT member on the committee would constantly put to submitters the following question: does the Treaty of Waitangi give different rights based on ancestry? This absolute trope of inequality. Now, the lie in that, the falsehood underlying that statement is that difference is inequality, and it's not. Now, there are all kinds of ways we can be different. We can have kaupapa Māori health services, or schools, or social services. And in fact, anyone who knows the area will know that you don't even have to be Māori to access them. They're for everyone. But to suggest that to deliver services in a particular way to best serve communities is in some way unequal is an absolute fallacy. And time and again we heard the resource management trope come up. David Seymour himself mentioned it today. Now, we pressed on that because if there's something there we wanted to know, we asked the question, what is it? What is the special advantage that Māori have under the Resource Management Act? No one could put their finger on it. And if it's a special advantage, well, if it's a special advantage for mana whenua to be asked about a project that might impact their customary rights, well, that's a world I want to live in, because that's actually respecting customary rights and property interests. And you should be respecting that as well. And the suggestion, of course, the suggestion that Māori are precluded in some way is just false. The provision of services, the fallacy is that the provision of services should be in a non-Māori way. And what that does is essentially exclude the reality that there is more than one way of doing things, that we can do things which are equal and different, and that's not appropriate. So what we have here is a situation where 300,000 people have stood up, and many people at Select Committee spoke up. But over there, they stood by. They stood by and did nothing. And they actually presided over a piece of legislation which has been exceedingly divisive. Now, you can talk about a conversation, and we are prepared for a conversation, and I'm proud to stand with my colleagues, my Māori colleagues who have spoken today here from the Labour Party, from the Greens, and from Te Pāti Māori. But to have an ill-thought-out bill based on premises which are fundamentally racist is not having a constitutional conversation. The time may come to talk about how we honour the treaty in a more fulsome way, about how we live together and address some of the gross inequalities which continue in our society. But to put a bill into the House that we know is never going to be passed, so that we can see some of the hateful rhetoric coming out, is simply divisive, wasteful, and wrong. So I'm proud to speak today, but proud not for what this House has done, but for what New Zealand has done. It has come out in its thousands and hundreds of thousands to say, we'll have no part of this.
I call Carl Bates.
Mr. Speaker, my colleagues have already said that this law is a simplistic tool that does not address the underlying issues, and have highlighted the steps that the national-led government has been taking to address the genuine concerns that Kiwis have. So now, Mr. Speaker, let me turn to the vision that National has for our country. We want a thriving, united New Zealand, where every Kiwi enjoys equal opportunity and equal citizenship, and takes pride in our shared future. Kiwis do best, Mr. Speaker, when we are working together in a spirit of unity and of mutual respect. At the heart of our nation's foundation lies the Treaty of Waitangi, the document that sets out the framework for the relationship between Māori and the Crown. It is our duty to ensure the Crown upholds its obligations under the treaty, and that historical grievances are addressed in a fair and in a just manner. Mr. Speaker, as my colleagues have also said, While we may not agree on every issue, successive national governments have worked constructively with Māori on treaty matters, always ensuring equal citizenship and equal opportunity for all New Zealanders. This is a commitment we will continue to uphold, addressing each case and issue on its own merits, always striving for better outcomes for all. National also has a proud record when it comes to treaty settlements, having made more progress than any government in resolving historical grievances. More importantly, Mr. Speaker, we are now seeing the benefits of this progress. The Māori economy has seen remarkable growth, with its asset base rising from $69 billion in 2018 to $119 billion in 2023. This is not just a statistic. It represents real, tangible benefits for communities across New Zealand, particularly in the regions where Māori are making a significant economic contribution. The work we've undertaken in settling grievances is vital to ensuring and securing a prosperous future. We must continue to build on this foundation, ensuring all treaty settlements are completed and implemented, with benefits flowing through to iwi, to communities, and to New Zealand as a whole. We must keep moving forward. In the past year alone, we've achieved notable success, Mr. Speaker, through partnership with Māori health organisations. Over 69,000 vaccinations have been delivered to New Zealanders. We've seen more than 20 Māori-led or Māori-partnered projects placed on the fast-track list. We've also committed over $200 million to Māori housing providers and helped nearly 2,000 children, many of them Māori, move out of emergency housing. When Māori succeed, New Zealand succeeds. Our fates are intertwined. Together, we are working towards a better, more prosperous New Zealand for the future and for the future generations of all Kiwis. National does not commend this bill to the House, Mr. Speaker, and it will vote against it.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The noes have it. The noes have it. A party vote is called forth. Clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party Aotearoa New Zealand.
Te kau mā rima ngā pōti e kau.
ACT New Zealand.
11 votes in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
He ono ngā pōti e whakahe.
Thank you. Before I announce the vote, following this announcement, a waiata has been agreed to. The ayes are 11, the noes are 112. The motion is lost. That's enough. That's enough. If there's to be a waiata, now is the time. Takura, we're okay. Is there a waiata? No. Fella, wait. Excuse me. Good boy, on your way. Someone come and help him out. Just want to say to the whole gallery who's applauding, that sort of outburst does not help us move forward in the tikanga of this House. Most unhelpful. I call on Government Order today number 2.
Medicines Amendment Bill, interrupted debate on first reading.
Sorry, what's going on? Sorry? I've called on Government Order today number 2. Do we go on to number 3? The Honourable Penny Henare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I support and endorse the words of my colleague who spoke on this bill before it was interrupted, and acknowledging that for Kiwis right across Aotearoa, the access to medicines is important. The access to the right medicines, however, is the most important thing. And making sure that the processes in order to get those matters, get the right framework to allow the right decisions for the right medicines to be accessed in this country are hugely important. What we know, however, though, Mr. Speaker, is we can tinker with some of the legislation. We can put something that seems like such a token gesture because it means nothing unless the funding is there to purchase those particular medicines. So we stand to make sure that when this bill goes to the committee and when it's considered and more submissions are heard on this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, we can make sure that those voices are heard to hold this government to account on their promise to delivering medicines to New Zealanders. And that's hugely important, Mr. Speaker. And we heard the speeches in the House as this particular bill was introduced, and we want to look closely at what that means with respect to the international standards that other countries place on the access to those medicines, the research to make sure that it's robust, And I wonder too, just given the nature of world affairs at the moment, Mr. Speaker, what does that actually mean? We can't deny that. We can't simply say that that country does it, so we must do it too. We must look more broadly at this particular matter. Sometimes that means not always agreeing with those that we've usually aligned ourselves with. We can't look towards international standards without making sure that we continue to hold a truly independent foreign policy, one that says we'll do what's right for New Zealanders. And we can't shortcut those matters. And this particular bill, while it might look towards greater access, we must make sure that it's robust enough to show that New Zealanders can continue to make sure that the medicines that it accesses are the right ones and won't do harm to Kiwis. Now, Mr. Speaker, we know this particular matter is one of great concern, consternation, and priority for New Zealanders. In fact, in all of my time in Parliament and every election campaign that I've entered into, health and access to medicines has been one of those topics that continues to be at the forefront of the debate wherever we go across this country. And rightly so, because it touches on an emotion that every member of this House and every New Zealander and communities around this country feel passionate about, because it affects them. It affects their families. It affects their loved ones. It affects their friends and their wider community. Which is why, Mr. Speaker, when we look towards this particular bill, we must make sure that in supporting it, as Labor does, at least for more consideration, that we continue to look at the system in its entirety, not to cut corners while trying to build a house. And that's the point we want to make on this side of the House as we look towards those regulations and making sure that Kiwis can access the medicine that they need to access. Mr. Speaker, a good man by the name of Mr. Malcolm Mulholland, who regularly contacts members from right across the House. I acknowledge the journey and the fight that he and so many others have had with our legislation, with members of this House, with governments of all hues, to make sure that Kiwis get that access. And one of the challenges with that, Mr. Speaker, is when I think of Mr. Mulholland, I think of his wife, Wikitori. And it makes me sad when I think of her and so many others, that often when we come to this House, we hope to do more, we hope to do good things for people, and often, sometimes, legislation or other barriers, political barriers, can stand in the way, because the cost is a real cost. It's a human cost. And access to medicine is important, and I'll reiterate the point that access to the right medicines is even more important. So, Mr. Speaker, my colleague, Dr.